Many regions of America have their cultural distinctions and stereotypes, whether it's Southern hospitality or SoCal bouginess, but regions and stereotypes often change, sometimes having a completely different image or reputation than what they have now. In the state of New York, you have the Western New York region, notable for the cities of Buffalo and Rochester. Today, that area is known for Niagara Falls, access to the Great Lakes. It created buffalo wings. It has passionate sports fans. It has a rich modern architectural history. However, for a time, Western New York was a region with a different notoriety. It had a perceived reputation of being a hotbed of religious and radical activity. Their level of spiritual fire and political firebrandness was so overwhelmingly abundant that some figures and later historians for a time referred to Western New York as the burnt-over district. The full picture, as always, is more complex, but where did this reputation come from? What about Western New York supposedly made this area a target or spawning point of so much activity? The first thing to make Western New York stand out was that in early American and colonial history, it was a part of the original frontier. It was the center of the indigenous Haudenosaunee Confederacy, more commonly known as the Iroquois. Most of the region was west of the British Proclamation Line of 1763, the attempted legal western limit for British colonial settlement. Not that the colonists usually listened, but, they tried. After America's independence, the line was abolished, and the Haudenosaunee homelands would be among the first indigenous lands to be purchased or seized by independent America. But multiple states wanted the territory. The once colony, now state of New York would claim the region along with, believe it or not, Massachusetts. But eventually, in 1788, Massachusetts agreed to sell its claims over the region in the Phelps-Gorham Purchase. Then in 1794, the Treaty of Canandaigua reduced Haudenosaunee lands down to a few sprinkled reservations, mostly similar to the ones still around today. New York State was now in control, and the settling of the first frontier began. Western settlement in the area, however, coincided with the Second Great Awakening, which was a period of religious revival across the Western world. Notably, there were several evangelical Protestant and Restorationist Christian movements that got their start during this time period and grew heavily in popularity. Looking at Western and Central New York, you do indeed find a hotbed of religious activity in the early to mid-19th century. Palmyra, New York is where Joseph Smith around 1828 claimed to have been approached by an angel and revealed the golden plates that would become the foundation for the Book of Mormon and the Latter-day Saint movement. The Millerite movement, while getting its start in eastern New York in 1834, quickly spread into the western region. Similarly, the Shakers began a revival of their own called the Era of Manifestations, which quickly spread into western New York communities in the 1830s. In 1843, a group of radical Pietist Christians known as the Community of True Inspiration founded their first all-church settlement in West Seneca, New York, which would be referred to as the Ebenezer Colonies. Then in 1848, you have the Perfectionist Christian and Free Love Oneida community start near Oneida, New York, which would be popular throughout upstate New York for decades. Then also that same year, spiritualism began in Hydesville, New York, after the Fox sisters claimed to have conducted the first seance with the dead. Then throughout these years, Washington Gladden grew up in western New York and would go on to start the social gospel movement. With all these varying movements and radical ideas, it was only a matter of time before they influenced politics as well. The moral teachings of several Great Awakening movements turned New York into a hotbed of abolitionism. In 1827, the Oneida Institute becomes the first U.S. college to admit black students on equal terms to white students. The environment also melded well with utopian socialist movements, causing many notable communities such as the Skinatels community to form. In 1836, a Seventh-day Baptist school known as Alfred University let in not only students of all races, but also female students as well, fully co-ed and integrated. Then, of course, in 1848, the famous Seneca Falls Convention in the town of the same name occurred, the first major women's rights convention. With all this stuff going on, the idea of Western New York being the burnt-over district wasn't a contemporary one so much as an afterthought. The term itself arose as the Second Great Awakening was finally dying down. The New School Presbyterian minister Charles Finney, notable for participating in the holiness movement of the early 20th century, would help popularize the term, using it to describe less the religious fervor itself, but the exhausted aftermath. In an 1876 autobiography released after his death, he wrote, "I found that region of country what, in the Western phrase, would be called a burnt district. There had been, a few years previously, a wild excitement passing through the region, which they called a revival of religion, but which turned out to be spurious. It was reported as having been a very extravagant excitement, and resulted in a reaction so extensive and profound as to leave the impression on many minds that religion was a mere delusion. A great many men seemed to be settled in that conviction, taking what they had seen as a specimen of a revival of religion. They felt justified in opposing anything looking toward the promoting of a revival. So in this case, the burnt over district means burnt out. So many movements moved through the region that they kind of got tired of it all. For many decades afterwards, Western New York had this historical memory added to its reputation. But in the second half of the 20th century, historians were starting to be skeptical of it. In 1984, historian Linda K. Pritchard published a work in which she compared statistical data of Western New York to other regions of the country. It turns out, the level of religious fervor, at least, was pretty typical for the time period. But if that's the case, how come there were so many notable religious and political movements from the area that not only made a splash at the time, but in several cases still exist today? Mormonism and Seventh-day Adventism aren't exactly extinct or obscure, and seances are practically Halloween pop culture at this point. Well, let's consider the list of things I brought up that were popular in Western New York. Several of these started far from New York and certainly didn't start there. Then if we go by the counties traditionally considered a part of the burnt-over district, that eliminates many more of these. Sure, they spread to Western New York, but they spread elsewhere too. Like, come on, feminism didn't magically start in Seneca Falls, they just had the first major rally there. The real reason that Western New York seems so wild goes back to its origins as a frontier. Ideas spread outwards, and with the region's access to both the Ohio Valley and Great Lakes, it meant most ideas were going to pass through them. Then add New York State's large population and economic influence, then you also have a weighted focus on them compared to everywhere else. Similar to someone today seeing California or Texas as all of America. Several of the ideas that did start in Western New York would move on as well. Mormonism made its way to Utah, while the Ebenezer colonies eventually migrated to Iowa. So while Western New York isn't known as the burned-over district anymore, it is still interesting to learn about how an area's historical reputation can evolve and influence our perceptions, especially when studying its history. I'm Emperor Tiger Star, and I'll see you guys— Wait! I wanted to end this video by announcing some very nerdy merch. 2026 is coming up, and instead of getting a boring normal calendar, why don't you get my brand new 2026 German States calendar? That's right, a calendar dedicated to the kingdoms, duchies, and principalities of a pre-unified 20th century Germany. I mean, imagine how cool it'll be next year to celebrate summer by flipping the page to June for Bavaria. These are all hand-drawn maps by yours truly, and of course buying these calendars or any other new piece of merch helps supports the channel. Look, I'm an Aztec Codex drawing on a mug! Isn't that cool? And way cheaper than a t-shirt, by the way. They're all available to purchase now in the link below, and I hope you love them. Thank you very much.